Welcome to Family Revenge Betrayal. Stay tuned, have a fun time, and let's talk in the comments. Let's go.
Portland, Oregon. I opened my fiancé's laptop and watched my father buy my heartbreak like a clearance item. 50 grand for him to dump me and marry my cousin, Tessa. 3 seconds, my life collapsed. And then I smiled because they thought I'd stay quiet, and I didn't that night. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments. And I will give you a heart. Let me tell you something right up front. The kind of betrayal I'm about to describe doesn't just hurt your feelings. It rewires the way you look at your own blood, your own memories, your own last name. Because the night I found out my father paid my fiancé to leave me and marry my cousin instead, I didn't suspect it. I didn't hear rumors. I didn't feel vibes. I saw the receipt. I saw the numbers. I saw the transfer. And I saw my father's words laid out like a business memo, like he was ordering office supplies instead of selling his daughter's life. And the craziest part is I wasn't even snooping. I was just tired. Like bone tired. The kind of tired where your eyes feel gritty, your shoulders feel welded to your neck, and your brain starts doing that fuzzy thing where you can't remember if you locked the door or if you dreamed locking it. I'd been at my apartment finishing a quarterly report for the accounting firm I worked at, late enough that the whole building felt like it was holding its breath. The air was too still. The only sound was my laptop fan whining like it was pleading for mercy, and the little tick of my cheap wall clock that always sounded louder at night, like it knew secrets. I had a mug of cold coffee that tasted like regret, and my engagement ring kept catching the light whenever I moved my hand, like a tiny spotlight yelling, "Look what you have." For years with my fiancé, Carter. 6 months from the wedding. Invitations already ordered. My dress hanging in the closet wrapped in plastic like a ghost waiting to be worn. Carter had texted earlier, casual as a man asking what's for dinner. Staying at my place tonight. Early meeting. Nothing suspicious. Nothing dramatic. Just a normal lie, delivered in a normal font. Then I reached for my phone to set an alarm and saw his laptop on my coffee table. He'd left it the day before. The screen was still on, dimmed but awake, like it was waiting for me. And I remember thinking he really is the kind of man who forgets things. He forgets his keys, his jacket, his promises. I sat down, rubbed my eyes, and that's when I saw the email notification at the top of his screen. Sender, my father. Subject line, our arrangement. I swear my body reacted before my mind did. It was like my stomach dropped through the floor, and my fingers went numb, and yet somehow my hands still moved. You ever have that moment where you watch yourself do something and you're thinking, don't touch it, don't touch it, don't touch it, and then you touch it? That was me. I clicked. And there it was. My father's name at the top, like it belonged there. Like he had every right to be in Carter's private inbox, negotiating my future like it was a contract dispute. The first line hit me so hard I actually blinked like I could clear it away. Carter, I've transferred the remaining $25,000 to your account as we discussed. That brings the total to $50,000 as agreed. $50,000. That's what my father decided my heart was worth. Not priceless. Not sacred. Not protected. Worth 50 grand, paid in installments like a car note. My eyes kept moving even though my brain was screaming. I know this isn't easy, but Tessa can give you the life Sarah simply can't. And just like that, I became a comparison chart. My cousin Tessa, beautiful, bubbly, always perfectly styled, always smelling like expensive shampoo, always posting brunch photos like her life was a magazine spread. Her family was connected in marketing. My father wrote, "Her family's connections will advance your career faster than my daughter ever could." And then he said the line that still makes my teeth clench when I repeat it. Tessa's trust fund alone is worth more than Sarah will make in her lifetime. Do you understand how evil that is? That's not disappointment. That's not concern. That's contempt. That's a parent looking at their child's future and calculating it like an accountant who hates you. And then the instructions like he was coaching a hitman. When you break the engagement, keep it clean. Don't mention our conversations. Sarah doesn't need to know about this. She'll move on eventually. She always does what's practical. He wrote that about me. He wrote that like a trait he'd trained into me, like a dog trick. She always does what's practical. In other words, she won't scream. She won't expose us. She won't burn the house down. She'll swallow it and call it maturity. And then I saw Carter's reply, time-stamped just 3 hours earlier, like the betrayal was still warm. I understand, Mr. Richardson. I care about Sarah, but you're right about the opportunities with Tessa. I'll end things this weekend. Thank you for helping me see clearly. The money will help me start fresh. Start fresh. Like I was a bad haircut. Like I was a job he quit. Like I was clutter he'd been paid to throw out. I read it again. And again. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you the room literally tilted. I grabbed the edge of the couch because it felt like my bones were suddenly made of water. My chest tightened the way it does when you get bad news on the phone, and your body thinks it needs to run, but there's nowhere to run because you're trapped inside your own life. I sat there in the dark, and everything I'd been doing before that moment, the report, the numbers, the emails, the deadlines, it all became irrelevant. Because those were numbers I controlled. This was a number that controlled me. 50,000. For years. 6 months. 1 cousin. 1 father. 1 fiancé. And my whole history started replaying like someone hit fast forward. Sunday dinners where my father would clap Carter on the back and call him son. Holiday photos where Tessa would lean in too close, smiling like we were sisters. Family jokes. Birthday candles. Shared secrets when we were teenagers. All of it suddenly looked different, like a photo that's been edited, and you only notice the blur once you know it's there. And I need you to understand something. The pain wasn't just he cheated. The pain was realizing my father was in on it. The pain was realizing the referee had rigged the game. Imagine love as a safety net, right? Like you fall, and your family catches you. That night, I found out the net wasn't just gone, my father had sold it and collected the cash. I stared at my engagement ring and remembered the Santa Monica Beach proposal, the sunset, the knee, the tears, the promises about growing old together. I remembered calling my mom and hearing her cry happy tears. I remembered my dad shaking Carter's hand like he was proud. And now I'm sitting there realizing that at some point, maybe it was all real, and then my father turned it into a transaction. And I know what you're thinking because I thought it too. Expose them. Screenshot it. Send it to the entire family group chat. Walk into Sunday dinner and slam the laptop down like a judge delivering a sentence. Call Tessa and ask her if she knew she was being handed a fiancé like a gift bag. And believe me, my mind went there. My mind went to all the messy, satisfying, scorched earth ideas. But you know what else happened? Something colder. Something quieter. I heard my father's voice in my head saying, "She always does what's practical." And I hated that he was right about how I'd handled disappointment my whole life. I hated that he knew I'd been trained to keep the peace, trained to be the mature one, trained to be the one who takes the hit and says, "It's fine." And that hatred, it didn't make me cry. It made me still. It made me strategic. Because I realized in that moment, if I reacted the way they expected, if I screamed, if I fought, if I begged, I'd be playing the role they wrote for me. And I was done being cast as the boring, practical daughter who quietly gets replaced by the shiny cousin with the trust fund. So I sat there until the sun started bleeding into the sky through my blinds, and I didn't sleep. I watched the light change like I was watching my old life expire. And in that quiet, I made decisions that felt almost illegal. Not morally illegal, but emotionally illegal. Like I was breaking rules I'd been living under for decades. First, I called in sick to work. My voice sounded calm on the phone, which is hilarious, because I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Then I called my landlord and asked about breaking my lease early. He sounded annoyed, like I was inconveniencing him, and I remember thinking, wow, even strangers can hear the shift in your voice when your life breaks. Then I called a lawyer. Not a dramatic courtroom lawyer. Not somebody yelling objection, but a quiet, precise attorney who asked me questions in a tone that made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Like what happened to me was real. And then, the most important part, I planned how I was going to behave when Carter finally tried to end it clean, the way my father paid him to. Because if you think I was going to give him the satisfaction of watching me crumble, You don't know me yet. And before I go further, I need you to do something for me, because I'm genuinely curious and I want this to feel like a real conversation, not a performance. Where are you watching from right now? What state? What city? Even if you're just in your living room with the volume low, because someone's asleep nearby. Drop it in the comments, because I want to know how far this story reaches, and I want to know I'm not the only one who's had to smile through betrayal like it was polite. Now back to Carter, because 2 days later, he texted me like nothing had happened. Dinner this weekend? That's how these people operate. They'll ruin your life and still ask what you want to eat. He picked our usual Italian restaurant, the one with the soft lighting and the fake candles, the one where we'd celebrated anniversaries and toasted to forever. I got there early on purpose. I chose a table where I could see the door. I ordered water. I didn't touch it. My hands were steady, but inside my head was loud. Not crying loud. Math loud. I was counting every breath, every possibility, every outcome. When he walked in, he looked like a man rehearsing lines. He smiled too hard. He kissed my cheek like he was doing it for an audience. He sat down and immediately started fidgeting with his napkin. And I remember thinking, oh, you're nervous. You're not heartbroken. You're nervous about delivering the script my father bought. He leaned forward and did the gentle voice, the one men use when they want to break you without feeling like the villain. Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about us lately. And then, I did it. I cut the cord. I interrupted him with a calmness that didn't even feel like it belonged to me. It's okay, I said. I know. The color left his face so fast, it was almost funny. You know, he stammered. And I held his eyes and lied so smoothly, I scared myself. I know you're going to end the engagement, I said. And honestly, I've been feeling the same way. His shoulders visibly dropped in relief. Relief, not sadness. Relief that he didn't have to do the hard part. Relief that he could leave me and still feel like a decent man. And I watched that relief, and I felt something sharp settle in my chest. This man never deserved me. Not even before the money. I kept going, still calm. We want different things. It's nobody's fault. We've grown apart. He blinked, trying to catch up with the new script I was handing him. You're being so understanding, he said, reaching for my hand like we were sharing a sweet moment. I pulled my hand back and smiled politely, the kind of smile you give a stranger who holds the elevator. I just want you to be happy, I said, and then I dropped the line that was for me, not for him. You should be with someone who fits your ambitions. His eyes flickered. For a second, guilt flashed across his face like a weak signal. Maybe he recognized the phrase. Maybe he heard my father's voice in it. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded. You deserve someone who appreciates you, he said, still trying to play hero in his own story. Yes, I said, I do. And then I took off my ring. Slowly. Not dramatically. Just deliberately. I placed it on the table between us like evidence. For years reduced to a circle of metal. Keep it, I said. Sell it. Do whatever you want. He stared at the ring like it was burning him. And then he said something that almost made me laugh, because the audacity was so pure. I never wanted to hurt you. I leaned in slightly, and kept my voice soft so he'd have to listen. And yet here we are. I stood up, picked up my purse, and walked out while he sat there with the ring and his relief and his purchased clean break. And as I stepped into the cool night air, my body finally reacted. My legs felt shaky, like I'd just run a mile. My throat tightened. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. I didn't cry yet. Not in public. Not where the world could watch. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring at the edges, and when I got to my apartment, I closed the door, slid down it, and finally the sobs hit me like waves. The kind of crying that empties you out. The kind where you can't catch your breath and you're angry at yourself for crying because you promised yourself you wouldn't. I cried for the years. I cried for the dress in my closet. I cried for the father I thought I had. I cried for the cousin I trusted. I cried because I knew that this wasn't over. Because now I had the truth, and they didn't know I had it. And that meant I had something more powerful than anger. I had information. And then I remembered the email again. That one sentence my father wrote like he was so sure of me. She'll move on eventually. She always does what's practical. And I wiped my face, looked at my reflection in the dark window, and I whispered, "You're about to meet a version of me you didn't calculate." And then I opened my laptop, not to cry, not to rant, but to make my next move, the kind of move that would make the whole family's perfect little storyline start cracking from the inside. I didn't wake up the next morning like some movie heroine with mascara streaks and a motivational playlist and a sunrise epiphany. I woke up with swollen eyes, a headache that felt like punishment, and this strange, terrifying calm that only happens when your heart is so hurt it stops begging and starts building a case. You know that feeling when you realize crying won't change the facts, so your brain switches into survival mode, like, all right, if this is a rigged game, I'm going to learn the rules, I'm going to learn the angles, and I'm going to walk out with the only thing that matters, my dignity. That's where I was. And the first thing I did before I even brushed my teeth was open that email again and screenshot everything. Every line, every timestamp, every as agreed. I forwarded it to myself, then to a brand new email address I created on the spot, because paranoia is not paranoia when people are actually plotting against you. I saved it in 3 places: cloud, external drive, and a hidden folder with a boring name like Tax Forms 2019, because if Carter ever realized what he'd left behind, he'd panic and try to wipe it. And then I did something that might sound small, but it was the first moment I felt power return to my body. I changed every single password in my life. Banking, email, work logins, phone carrier, the little streaming account Carter used. Everything. Because betrayal like this isn't just emotional, it's logistical. These people don't just hurt your feelings, they can ruin your credit, steal your identity, twist your narrative, and make you look unstable when you react. That's what manipulators do. They push you, then point at your reaction like it's proof you were the problem. And I already knew the story they were preparing to tell about me. Sarah's emotional. Sarah's dramatic. Sarah couldn't handle it. Sarah ran away. So I refused to give them a single loose thread. Then I walked into my closet and stared at the dress. You know what's wild? It wasn't even a fancy moment. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. The plastic cover made this soft crinkling sound when I pulled it back, and I just stood there looking at the fabric like it belonged to someone else. Like I was looking at a costume I'd almost worn in a play where everyone backstage was laughing at me. And I said out loud, to an empty room, "You almost had me." Then I did the petty thing I'm not ashamed of. I grabbed a trash bag and started collecting every trace of Carter that lived in my space. His hoodie, his toothbrush, the dumb little souvenir mug he loved, a charger cable. Those tiny items that don't matter until you realize they were all part of you making room for someone who was already selling you out. I didn't throw them away right then because I wasn't in a chaos mood. I was in a controlled mood. I packed them neatly, like evidence, like I was removing a tumor. And the whole time, my mind kept circling one question that I want you to answer for me in the comments, because I know this audience has lived through family politics and favoritism and betrayal disguised as love. Did my father cross the line beyond repair? Yes or no? Because paying your child's fiancé to marry somebody else, that's not parenting, that's sabotage. That's not guidance, that's a hostile takeover. And here's the next thing I did, the thing people don't think about until it's too late. I stopped talking. I went quiet, not depressed quiet, strategic quiet. I didn't confront my mother. I didn't call my brother. I didn't text Carter anything angry. I didn't even block him. I let him believe the breakup was mutual, because a guilty person is easiest to manage when they think they got away clean. I watched him text me these soft little "are you okay?" messages afterward, like he was auditioning for sainthood, and I responded with short, calm replies. "I'm fine. I'm focusing on work. No hard feelings. And if that makes you mad, good, it should, because it's disgusting how people want credit for not stabbing you twice." But I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me. I was building a clean narrative because I knew if I exposed the email too early, they'd spin it. My father would say he was protecting me. Carter would say he was confused. Tessa would cry and pretend she was innocent. And suddenly I'd be the villain for ruining the family. That's how these families work. The person who reveals the truth becomes the problem, not the person who did the evil thing. So I waited. I watched. And then I took action where it mattered. My future. I pulled up my old email threads, the ones from months earlier from a recruiter who had been chasing me for a senior accounting role at a fintech startup overseas. I had ignored it back then because I was being practical, because I was planning a wedding, because I was trying to build a safe little life that apparently everyone else saw as disposable. That recruiter had emailed me again, 2 weeks earlier. We're still interested. Can you talk? And the timing was so perfect, it almost felt like the universe was whispering, you can either stay here and be humiliated slowly, or you can leave and become unrecognizable. I clicked reply. My fingers hovered for a second, and I felt fear, real fear, because leaving means admitting your old life is dead. Leaving means choosing yourself in a way women are trained to feel guilty about. But then I pictured my father typing, she always does what's practical, and I hit send. Yes. Let's talk today. The call happened that afternoon. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, notepad beside me, trying to sound normal while my insides still felt bruised. The CEO, a woman named Rachel, came on the line with this sharp, no-nonsense tone, like she didn't have time for small talk or pity. She asked me about revenue recognition, risk controls, scaling, investor reporting. She threw scenarios at me fast, like she was stress testing not just my skills but my spine. And for the first time since the email, my brain lit up in a way that wasn't pain. It was competence. It was confidence. It was me remembering, oh right, I'm not just someone's almost wife. I'm a professional. I'm valuable. I can run circles around people who think I'm boring. Rachel said, you've been undervaluing yourself. And I almost laughed, because if she only knew how literal that statement was. By the end of the call, she offered me the position. Senior accountant. High growth. Stock options. A relocation package. And I stared at the offer letter when it came through like it was a door out of prison. Here's what I want you to understand, and I'm saying this for every viewer who's ever been treated like the responsible one, while the flashy one got all the praise. When you've been betrayed, you don't just need closure. You need leverage. You need a future so big that the people who tried to reduce you start looking small. So I accepted. I signed the contract with a hand that didn't shake. And then I started the escape plan like it was a military operation. I booked the flight. I sold furniture. I boxed up my life in silence. I handled paperwork. I canceled vendors. And this part right here, this is where my favorite kind of petty happened. I called every wedding vendor myself. Not sobbing, not begging, not dramatic. Calm. Polite. Surgical. Hi, this is Sarah Richardson. I'm calling to cancel our reservation. I'm sorry to hear that. Is everything okay? Yes. We're no longer proceeding. That's it. No details. No weakness. No story. Because I refused to let my humiliation become someone else's gossip before I was ready. And yet the entire time I'm doing all this, there's this voice in my head asking the question that probably just entered your mind too. Did Tessa know? Was she in on it? Because let's be honest, even if my father paid Carter, my cousin still had to open her arms and say, yes, come on in, I'll take what was hers. And I didn't have the answer yet, which made it worse. Uncertainty is torture. It's like a splinter you can't pull out. 2 days before my flight, my father called. Of course he did. He always called when there was a shift in the family machine, like he could feel control slipping. His voice was casual, too casual, like he was checking on a business investment. Your mother tells me you're making a move. And I remember gripping the phone, feeling my pulse in my fingertips, thinking, act normal, don't give in the satisfaction of knowing he broke you. I got a career opportunity, I said. It's a big step. He sighed, the disappointed patriarch sigh, the one designed to make you feel like a child. This seems sudden. And I could hear it in his tone, the assumption that my life is something he gets to approve. Don't you think you're being impulsive? And I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable it was almost insulting. No, I said. I think I'm being practical. The silence on the line after that was delicious. You know when you say something that lands, and you can feel the other person recalculating in real time? That was it. He cleared his throat. "What about Carter?" he asked, and I could practically hear him trying to decide what level of concern to perform. "Carter and I ended things," I said. "Mutual." He paused, just long enough to confirm what he already knew, and then he went for the next manipulation, the soft guilt. "Your cousin Tessa will miss you at family events." Imagine that. The man who sold me out acting like he's worried about my cousin missing me. I kept my voice even. "I'm sure she'll be fine." And I hung up before he could say anything else, because sometimes the strongest move is ending the conversation before they get to steer it. The flight itself felt unreal. I sat on that plane with my carry-on under the seat, watching this safety demonstration like it was meant for my soul. In the event of loss of oxygen, secure your own mask before assisting others. I thought about that line for a long time, because my whole life, I'd been assisting others. I'd been the stable one, the practical one, the one who didn't make waves. And look where that got me. When I landed, the air was thicker, warmer. Everything smelled like fuel and rain and newness. My hotel room was small, clean, temporary. Perfect. I stood by the window looking at a city skyline I didn't know yet, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't pain. It was possibility. And then, because life is cruel and funny, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Carter came by. He said you two ended things amicably. He seemed so sad. So sad. I stared at those words and felt this cold laugh rise in my chest, because of course he seemed sad. That's what men like him do. They act sad, so everyone comforts them for the harm they caused. And I could have replied with the truth right then. I could have detonated the email. I could have ended the entire family's peace with one screenshot. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I realized something that night in that unfamiliar room, with my suitcases still closed and my old life still trying to text me from across an ocean. If I reveal the truth now, it becomes the story. Their story. Their drama. Their scandal. And I didn't move across the world to keep starring in their mess. I moved to build something so undeniable that when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't destroy me. It would expose them. So I turned off my phone, opened my laptop, and started preparing for my first day, and as I typed out my goals, my new budget, my new plan, one thought kept looping in my head like a warning and a promise at the same time. They think I disappeared because I couldn't handle being replaced, but what if I come back years later, so different they can't even recognize the woman they tried to discount? And what if the moment I walk into that family room again, the past isn't what hits them first? It's the life they never believed I could build. The first week in my new job felt like stepping into a different universe where nobody cared who my father was. Nobody cared what my cousin posted. Nobody cared that I was supposed to be a bride in 6 months. They only cared about results. And that was the cleanest kind of painkiller I'd ever had because it forced my brain to stop replaying the email like a horror movie and start focusing on numbers that actually made sense. The office was smaller than I expected. Not some shiny skyscraper fantasy. More like controlled chaos with glass rooms, whiteboards covered in scribbles, people walking fast with laptops tucked under their arms, and the constant hum of ambition like an engine that never shuts off. On my first day, Rachel didn't give me a tour or a welcome lunch or a little "we're so happy you're here." She handed me a folder and said, "Our cash flow reporting is a mess. Investor calls are in 10 days, and I need you to fix what nobody else has been able to fix." And I remember standing there in a brand new blazer I bought just to feel like a different woman and thinking, oh, so this is what it feels like to be needed for your competence, not tolerated for your stability. I sat at my desk and opened their spreadsheets and immediately saw the problem. Half the entries were inconsistent, categories didn't match, there were holes in the logic, and the worst part was nobody had documented anything properly, so every single number was a guess with a smile on it. I rolled up my sleeves, pulled up 3 screens, and started rebuilding the whole thing from the ground up like I was stitching my own life back together, cell by cell. And then, something almost embarrassing happened. I felt proud. Not proud like bragging, proud like oxygen. My chest loosened. My thoughts stopped spiraling. My hands stopped shaking. Because I realized the version of me my father described in that email, the practical one who would move on. He was right about one thing: I was practical, but he never understood what that meant. Practical doesn't mean weak. Practical means you don't waste energy screaming when you can build an exit. Practical means you don't beg a man to stay when you can outgrow him so completely he becomes a footnote. Practical means you can take betrayal and convert it into momentum. The first month was brutal. I lived on takeout and adrenaline. I learned the rhythm of the place, the unspoken hierarchy, who actually did work and who just talked in meetings. I learned which investors asked smart questions and which ones were just fishing for power. I learned how to walk into a room full of people older than me and speak like I belonged there without apologizing for existing. And when Rachel finally reviewed my cash flow rebuild, she didn't compliment me the way friends do. She gave me the kind of praise that feels like a stamp of approval in your bones. She said, "This is the first time I've seen our numbers tell the truth." That sentence hit me harder than any romantic promise ever did, because truth was exactly what had been stolen from me back home. And then the promotion started, not because anyone was doing me favors, but because I was doing what most people won't do. I was fixing ugly problems and taking responsibility for outcomes. 6 months in, Rachel pulled me into her glass office and slid a new contract across the table. Controller title, bigger salary, equity bump, and she said, "I need you in the room when decisions get made." I signed it without hesitation, walked back to my desk, and for a split second I thought about my father reading those words, controller, equity, decision-making, and I felt this cold little satisfaction curl in my stomach like, you priced me at $50,000, but you never understood you were gambling against a woman who knows how to multiply value. Now here's the part nobody tells you about reinventing your life. It doesn't feel glamorous most days. It feels lonely. It feels like eating dinner alone while your phone is quiet. It feels like hearing your mother's voice in your head when you pass couples holding hands and you think, that could have been me, and then you remember what me would have been, me smiling politely at family dinners while my cousin plays house with the man who was supposed to marry me. I had nights where I'd come home, drop my bag, sit on the edge of my bed, and just stare at the wall because the silence was so loud it felt like punishment. And then I'd remember the email again. She always does what's practical. And I'd get up and do something small but deliberate like meal prep, or organize my closet, or read a chapter of a book, because I refused to let grief turn me into the helpless version of myself they expected. I built routines like scaffolding, morning walks, a gym membership I actually used, a little notebook where I wrote down goals like I was training my mind to look forward instead of backward. And then, slowly, the city stopped feeling like a temporary hiding place and started feeling like mine. I found a coffee shop where the barista learned my order. I found a book club of people who didn't know my family history and didn't care. I made friends who judged me by how I showed up, not by what I was supposed to be. And the strangest thing happened. The more I built a life that fit me, the less I craved revenge as a performance. I still wanted justice, don't get me wrong, but I didn't want to scream it anymore. I wanted to live it. Meanwhile, back home, the little updates came in like poison postcards. My mother would text me something casual like, "Tessa got a new car," or "Carter switched jobs," and she'd act like it was just news, harmless, normal, and every time I saw their names pop up on my screen, my stomach would tighten like my body still recognized the threat even when my mind tried to stay calm. I never asked questions. I never reacted. I kept my responses polite, short, boring. Because silence is a weapon when other people expect you to supply them with drama. And then one night, about a year and a half after I left, my brother Mason called. Video call. His face appeared on the screen, older, a little heavier, that tired look people get when they're working too hard and pretending everything is fine. He smiled when he saw me, and for a second I felt that old warmth, the reminder that not everyone from that world was poison. "Hey," he said. "I miss you." The simplicity of it almost broke me. We talked about small stuff at first, his job, my work, the weather, the kind of conversation people have when they're tiptoeing around landmines. And then he hesitated, looked away, and said, "Dad's been asking about you. A lot." I could feel my pulse jump. "What does he say?" I asked, and I kept my voice neutral like I was asking about a distant coworker. Mason shrugged. "He says he's proud of you." He says you're doing amazing things. And he says he doesn't understand why you won't come home. I almost laughed, but it came out like a breath. He doesn't understand, I repeated, and the words tasted bitter because of course he didn't understand, because understanding would require admitting what he did, and men like my father would rather rewrite history than apologize honestly. Mason leaned closer to the camera, searching my face. Sarah, did something happen? Like, I know you and Carter ended it, but it always felt like more than that. And there it was, the opening. The moment where I could drop the truth like a bomb. The moment where I could finally say, your father paid him, your cousin benefited, your family smiled in my face while they negotiated my replacement. And my fingers actually tightened around my phone because part of me wanted to let it all spill. But I didn't. Not because I'm weak. Not because I'm protecting them. I didn't because I knew what happens when you tell the truth too early to someone who still lives inside the system. It puts them in the middle. It forces them to choose. It turns your pain into a family vote. And I wasn't ready to watch Mason get torn in half because of what our father did. So I swallowed it and said the most honest lie I could manage. I needed a fresh start. Mason looked disappointed, like he knew there was more, but he didn't push. Okay, he said softly. I want you in my life. That hit harder than any insult because it reminded me what I was sacrificing by staying away. I wasn't just avoiding my father, I was missing birthdays, holidays, the little normal moments that make a family feel like a family. And then Mason said something that made my blood go cold. He said, we're doing an engagement party for Tessa next month. She's marrying Carter. He said it like a fact, like he was reading a weather report, and I felt my body react before my mind did. My throat tightened and my ears rang for a second, like my brain was buffering. They're engaged? I asked, and I kept my voice calm with sheer willpower. Yeah, Mason said. It happened fast. Everyone's excited. Everyone's excited. I stared at my own face on the screen, reflected back at me in that little video window, and I saw how still I looked, how controlled, how practiced, and inside I was screaming because this was the official rewrite of my life. This was the part where they would parade their new couple at family events and act like it was destiny, like it wasn't purchased betrayal, and they would expect me to either show up smiling or stay away quietly so they could tell the story of how Sarah moved on, and Sarah chose her career. Mason kept talking, clueless. I know it's weird for you, but it's been a while, and you're doing great, and maybe it's time to come back and just be family again. Be family again. Like family is a sweater you put back on after it gets ripped. Like the person who ripped it didn't do it on purpose. I forced a small smile. I'm happy for you, I said, and I hated how adult and polite I sounded, like I was congratulating my own replacement. Mason relaxed, relieved he didn't have to deal with my emotions. And right there, in that exact moment, I made a decision so quiet nobody on earth heard it but me. I was going to let them have their engagement party, their photos, their fake joy. I was going to let them think the story was settled. And then, when the timing was perfect, when the stakes were high enough that they couldn't just brush it off, I was going to return on my terms, not as the abandoned almost bride, but as the woman they underestimated, the woman they tried to price, the woman who turned their $50,000 into a launch pad. And before we go further, quick thing, because a lot of you watching right now are not subscribed and you've been binging these stories like they're your nightly tea, and I get it, but if you enjoy this kind of raw, family betrayal, revenge storytelling, and you want to be part of our community, hit subscribe right now and join us. It helps more than you think, and it keeps these stories coming. After I ended the call with Mason, I sat in my apartment with the city lights outside my window, and I didn't cry, I didn't throw things, I didn't spiral. I opened my laptop and pulled up a file I'd been keeping since the night. I found the email, a simple folder with screenshots, timestamps, account details, and notes. I stared at it like it was a loaded weapon and said out loud, "So this is what we're doing." And then I started mapping the next phase, not revenge like a tantrum, revenge like a chess match. Because if they were going to celebrate my betrayal publicly, then my return would have to be public too, and not with yelling, not with drama, but with a kind of calm exposure that would make them feel it in their bones. And the funniest part is, I still hadn't answered the question that mattered most, the question that could change everything. Did Tessa know about the money, or did she just happily take what she wanted and call it love, because depending on that answer, the way I handled her would either be mercy or something far colder. And then my phone buzzed again, a new message, a subject line that made my stomach drop because it wasn't from my mother or Mason or anyone in my family. It was from a name I hadn't seen in years, and it said, "We need to talk about what your father did." I stared at that subject line until the letters stopped looking like letters and started looking like a threat, because when someone from your past pops up with "we need to talk," it's never about your health or the weather. It's always about the thing everybody pretends didn't happen. The sender was my aunt's longtime assistant, Marlene, which might sound random, but in my family Marlene was basically a shadow who heard everything because she was always in the room when the grown-ups thought they were being discreet. She wasn't blood, but she was close enough to the machinery to know where the bodies were buried, and I hadn't seen her name in years because after I left, I made sure my old life couldn't reach me unless I allowed it. My first instinct was to ignore it because when you've rebuilt yourself, you don't want to reopen wounds just because someone else suddenly grows a conscience. But then I thought about Carter and Tessa's engagement party, the family smiling, my father playing proud patriarch, and I felt that familiar coldness settle behind my ribs. I clicked the email. Marlene's message was short, clipped, written like someone who was shaking as they typed. "Sarah, I know you're far away. I know you don't want to be dragged back into this. But you deserve to know the truth. Your father didn't just pay Carter. He's still controlling things. And Tessa may not be as innocent as she acts. Please call me. Private number only." I read it twice, then 3 times because the phrase "still controlling things" made my skin prickle. This is the part people don't understand about a betrayal like mine. It's not one bad decision, it's a mindset. It's a father who thinks he's allowed to manage human beings like investments. If he did it once, he can do it again, and if he's still doing it, then I wasn't just betrayed, I was targeted. I didn't call right away. I paced first because my body needed to burn off the adrenaline. I walked from the kitchen to the window and back again, hands clenched, jaw tight, trying to decide if hearing more would give me power or poison me. And then I did what I always do when my emotions get loud. I got organized. I pulled out the folder. I checked the screenshots. I wrote down questions like I was prepping for a deposition. When did it start? Who knew? Did Tessa know? Did my mother know? What does "still controlling" mean? Is there more money? Is there blackmail? Is Carter in deeper than I thought? And then I went cold in the way that scares me sometimes, because I realized the scariest option wasn't that Tessa knew, it was that my father had been manipulating multiple people so long that the whole family was living inside a staged reality. I waited until it was late enough back home that fewer people would be awake and listening, and then I used a private number app called Marlene and held my breath like I was stepping back into a house that had burned down but still smelled like smoke. She answered on the second ring. "Sarah?" Her voice was low, urgent, and I could hear background noise like she was outside, maybe in a car, maybe pacing in a parking lot to get privacy. "It's me," I said, and my voice came out steady, which annoyed me, because part of me wanted to sound broken so she'd understand the weight of what she was about to say. "Talk," I added, simple, because I wasn't giving her space to dance around it. She exhaled. "I'm sorry," she started, and I cut in. "Don't start with sorry. Start with facts." There was a pause, like she didn't expect me to be that direct, and then she said, "Your father paid Carter. You know that. But what you don't know is he didn't stop after you left. He's been managing them. Managing Tessa and Carter. Their image. Their finances. Their social circle." My throat tightened. "Why?" I asked, and that one word held everything. Why would a man go that far unless he was protecting something? Marlene swallowed. I could hear it. "Because he thinks he made the right choice," she said. "He thinks he saved you from a man who wasn't good enough, and he thinks he built Tessa the life she deserved. He talks about it like he orchestrated a merger." A merger? That word made my stomach twist because it fit my father too well. "And Tessa?" I asked. "Did she know?" Silence. Long enough that my hands started to shake. "Marlene," I warned. "Did she know?" Marlene's voice dropped even lower. "She didn't know at first," she said, and I felt a strange, ugly relief flash through me, like, okay, maybe she's not a monster. Maybe she's just selfish. And then Marlene kept talking. "But she found out later. She found out about the money after they started dating seriously. The relief died instantly. How do you know that? I asked, and my voice cracked just slightly, not from sadness, but from fury. Marlene inhaled. Because she confronted your father in his office. I was there. She was crying. She asked him if it was true. He admitted it. And instead of walking away, she stayed.
Stayed.
That word felt like a slap. What did she say? I demanded. Word for word if you can. Marlene hesitated like she was replaying it. She said, so he was going to choose me anyway? So it's not like I stole him, it's like you just helped it happen faster. I went still. My brain latched onto the logic like it was a snake. Helped it happen faster. Do you hear the mental gymnastics? That's not innocence. That's justification. That's a person looking at betrayal and trying to turn it into destiny so they can sleep at night. And what did my father say? I asked, and I already knew because I know that man's voice. Marlene answered. He said, you're the practical choice. You'll make him better. And the family will look strong. The family will look strong. Not be strong. Look strong. That's the sickness. That's why this kind of betrayal hits so deep, because you realize you weren't loved as a person, you were loved as a role. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. So she stayed with him knowing he was purchased. I said more to myself than to Marlene. Yes, Marlene whispered. And Sarah, there's more. Of course there was more. There's always more when people start confessing. Say it, I said. Carter tried to back out, she said, and my heart actually stuttered because that was new. Back out of what? I asked. Of marrying Tessa, she replied. He told your father he wanted out. He said the relationship was toxic, that Tessa was controlling, that he didn't feel respected. Respected. I almost laughed because Carter never cared about respect with me. He cared about comfort. He cared about what I could provide quietly. And my father? I asked. Marlene's voice turned grim. Your father reminded him about the money, about the favors, about the connections he'd given him. And he said if Carter embarrassed the family, he'd ruin him professionally. He said, I built you. I can unbuild you. I closed my eyes and felt heat rise behind them, not tears, heat, the kind that makes you want to throw something. So Carter is trapped, I said, and that didn't make me pity him, it made me hate him more, because he chose the trap. He walked into it willingly for cash and status, and now he wanted sympathy for the consequences. Yes, Marlene said. And Tessa, she's not happy. She's obsessed with appearances. The influencer thing, the brand, the perfect couple posts, it's like she's trying to convince herself it was worth it. I could picture it, the staged smiles, the curated dinners, the filtered joy, and behind it the rot. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. What changed? Marlene exhaled again. Because your brother's wedding is coming up, she said, and my stomach dropped. Wedding? I repeated. Mason hasn't mentioned. Not Mason, she said quickly. Your cousin's brother. The one everyone's invited to. Big event. Your father is planning to introduce Carter and Tessa like royalty. And he's been saying something that scares me. My spine tightened. What? I asked. Marlene's voice shook. He's been saying Sarah will come back eventually. She always does what's practical. The old line. The same line. Like a brand slogan. Like I'm predictable. Like I'm a product that returns to the shelf. That right there made my blood run cold because it meant he still saw me as controllable, still assumed my silence was obedience, still believed he owned the narrative of my life. Let me guess, I said quietly. He wants me back because it looks better if I'm there. Marlene didn't answer right away, which is how I knew I was right. She finally said, he wants you there because if you're there smiling, it validates everything. That's it. That's the whole disease. If the betrayed person smiles, the betrayal becomes not that bad. If I show up and play nice, I become their evidence that my father's actions were for the best. And I will not be used as their proof of innocence. I stood by the window looking at the lights outside, and I felt this strange shift happen, like a lock clicking into place. Thank you, I told Marlene, and I meant it, because information is power, and she just handed me gasoline. But you need to understand something, I added. If I come back, it won't be to make them comfortable. Marlene whispered. I figured. I ended the call and just stood there, phone in hand, breathing slowly, because now the story was bigger. Now it wasn't just my father paying off my fiancé years ago. It was him still pulling strings, still trapping people, still trying to stage manage outcomes. And Tessa wasn't an ignorant bystander. She was a co-signer. I opened my notes and wrote one sentence at the top in all caps. They think they control the story. And then I wrote the next sentence. I control the timing. Because here's the moral lesson people don't like to hear but need to. Betrayal doesn't always come with screaming and slammed doors. Sometimes it comes with polite smiles and family values and a parent saying they're doing what's best, and the only way to survive it is to stop begging for fairness from unfair people and start building leverage that they can't talk their way out of. I wasn't going to show up and throw a tantrum. I wasn't going to send a messy group text. I was going to do what my father never anticipated. I was going to walk back into that world with receipts, composure, and a life so solid that when the truth finally surfaced, nobody could reduce me to the sad girl who got left. And the second I made that decision, my phone buzzed again. Not an email this time, a text from an unknown number, just 7 words that made my chest tighten. Carter knows you saw the email. The moment I read that text, my whole body went into that quiet, predator-still mode where your heart is pounding but your face doesn't move, because when someone says he knows, what they're really saying is the game just changed and the other side is about to start playing defense. I stared at the screen, reread it, and then I did the first thing people never do in these situations. I didn't respond. Not immediately. Because every response is information. Every emotion you show becomes a tool they can use. And I wasn't about to hand Carter a single extra advantage. I set my phone down, walked to the sink, turned on cold water, and ran my hands under it until my fingers went numb. Not because that fixes anything, but because it forces your body to stay in the present when your brain wants to sprint into panic. And then I picked my phone back up and looked at the unknown number like it was a snake.
Who sent it?
Carter? Tessa? My father? Someone fishing? The most dangerous part wasn't the message, it was the implication. Someone from that world had reached across an ocean and found a way into my life again. That's when I opened my evidence folder and did a quick check like a paranoid accountant with a trauma budget. Screenshots still there, backup still there, cloud access still mine, and then I changed my passwords again just to be safe, because betrayal doesn't stop at the heart, it goes for your access points. And then I wrote down the question that mattered. How did he find out? Carter wasn't with me when I saw the email. He wasn't in my apartment. He didn't watch me screenshot it. Which means either he went looking for his laptop and noticed it had been touched, or my father told him I knew, or Marlene's warning triggered something, and they started tightening the screws. And then I did what any sane person does when the past starts crawling back in. I called Rachel. Not to trauma dump, not to cry, but to anchor myself in reality. I need to take 2 personal days, I said. Family situation. Rachel didn't ask for details. That's why I respect her. She just said, handle it, then come back ready. Those words mattered more than she knew, because they reminded me my life wasn't on pause waiting for my family to stop being terrible. I had a real career, a real identity, a real future. And then I called my lawyer, the one I'd spoken to right after the breakup, and I asked one question. If someone threatens me with private information, what do I do? The lawyer's voice went practical, which was comforting. She told me to document everything, save every message, do not engage emotionally, and if I felt unsafe, consider a restraining order depending on jurisdiction. People like this rely on you reacting, she said, because reactions are messy. Paper trails are clean. Paper trails are clean. That line felt like armor. So I screenshotted the unknown text, saved it, logged the time, and then finally I replied with a message that was intentionally boring. Who is this? That's it. No fear. No anger. No confirmation. Just a question. The response came fast, like whoever it was had been staring at their phone waiting for me to blink. It's Carter. Don't freak out. I need to talk.
Don't freak out.
That phrase alone told me everything. People only tell you not to freak out when they're about to say something that should make you freak out. I stared at the words and felt the old disgust rise because even now, even after everything, he was trying to manage my emotions like I was inconvenient weather. I didn't call him. Calling gives him access to my tone, my hesitation, my breathing. I texted back, "Say what you need to say." And then I waited. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel amplified. The refrigerator hum, the distant traffic, my own breath. I walked to the window and watched people down on the street living normal lives, and I felt that surreal feeling again, like how can the world still be moving when my family is out there playing puppet master with my past? And then his next message came in chunks, like he was typing and deleting and typing again. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. And then, your dad he's complicated. And then, I can explain. Explain. You know what that word really means? It means, I'm about to tell you a version of events that protects me. I forced myself to sit down at my table, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to be steady, grounded, the way you sit down before signing something important. Then I typed, "You sold me for $50,000. Start there." The typing bubble appeared and disappeared like he was choking on his own conscience. Finally, it wasn't that simple. That's when I laughed. Not a cute laugh. A sharp, bitter laugh that startled me because it sounded like someone else. Not that simple is what people say when the facts are simple, but the shame is heavy. I texted. It was literally that simple. He transferred money. You agreed. You left. And then he did what cowards do. He tried to make it about feelings. I cared about you. I stared at that line and felt something flip in me because caring doesn't cash checks. Caring doesn't reply, "Thank you for helping me see clearly." Caring doesn't end a 4-year engagement like you're returning a sweater. So I wrote, "If you cared, you would have told me. If you cared, you would have refused. If you cared, you wouldn't be marrying my cousin." And then he said the sentence I didn't expect, the one that made my scalp tingle. "I'm not sure I'm going to marry her." I sat very still. That was a crack. Not because I cared about his regrets, but because cracks are opportunities. I wrote, "Why are you contacting me now?" And then he did it. He gave me the real reason. "Because your dad thinks you're coming back for the wedding." I felt my jaw tighten. Not shock, confirmation. He continued, "He's been talking about it. He says you always come back. He says you'll be there smiling, so it looks like everything worked out." Everything worked out. Like my life was an equation he solved correctly. I typed, "And you're scared?" Carter replied, "Yes." And there it was, the only honest word he'd said in years. Fear. Not remorse. Fear. He followed it with, "If you show up, I'm trapped. He'll make sure of it." I could almost see him pacing, the same fidgety man from the restaurant, still trying to keep his hands clean while everyone else bleeds. And then I asked him a question that would make or break everything. Did Tessa know? The typing bubble went on longer this time. And then, "She knows now." That wasn't enough. I pressed, "When did she find out?" And his reply was ugly and quick, like ripping off a bandage. "After we started dating." She confronted him. She stayed. I stared at that and felt a cold satisfaction because now I had independent confirmation of what Marlene told me. Tessa wasn't innocent. She wasn't a victim. She was a beneficiary who chose to stay once she knew the truth. And then Carter went even lower, like he wanted to trade secrets for sympathy. "She told me she deserved it," he texted. "She said you would have been fine anyway. She said you're the type who lands on your feet." I felt heat rise in my chest. That's the kind of cruelty people reserve for family, because strangers don't know exactly where to cut. "And you?" I asked. "What did you say?" His reply, "Nothing. I didn't want to fight." Of course. The man who didn't want to fight. The same man who watched my father degrade me and called it opportunity. And right here is where I want you to tell me the truth in the comments, because I already know what I would do, but I want to see what kind of people are watching this. If you were me, would you expose everything immediately, or would you wait and let them walk into the trap themselves? And tell me where you're watching from too, because I want to know if this kind of family betrayal hits the same in Texas as it does in Ohio, in Florida as it does in California, because I swear every place has its own version of we don't talk about it, and it always protects the wrong person. Carter kept texting like he could talk his way out of his own choices. I'm trying to fix it. I'm trying to do the right thing. I didn't know he would keep controlling everything. And I watched his words stack up like excuses in a courtroom. Then he sent the message that made my blood go cold again. He knows you have the email. He found out last week.
I stared at that. How?
I asked. Carter replied, he checks my accounts. He saw the laptop activity. He asked me if you ever used it. I lied and said no, but he didn't believe me. And then, he said if you show up and make a scene, he'll destroy you. Destroy me. From across the world. With what? Lies? Money? Influence? And then my brain did the thing it always does when threatened. It started listing assets and vulnerabilities like a spreadsheet. My reputation, my job, my relationships, my mother's peace, my brother's wedding, my ability to come home safely. And then I realized the real threat wasn't that my father could destroy me. The real threat was that he could poison the people I still loved against me before I even walked into the room. That's how he wins. Not by being right, but by controlling the story first. So I asked Carter one final question. Why are you telling me this? And his answer made my skin crawl because it was so selfish it was almost honest. Because I don't want to be the one who loses everything. There it is. He wasn't calling to apologize. He wasn't calling to make amends. He was calling because he could feel the cage tightening and he wanted an escape hatch. And I almost respected the honesty of that because at least it wasn't pretending to be love. I typed, "You already chose money over me. Don't ask me to save you now." And then I did something that made me feel powerful again. I ended it on my terms. "Do not contact me again," I wrote. "If you message me, I forward everything to my attorney." And then I blocked the number. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Because now I had proof of two things. My father was still monitoring, still threatening, still controlling, and Carter was unstable enough to crack, which meant the truth could leak before I was ready. Which meant I had to move faster. I opened my folder, added screenshots of the entire exchange, and then I created a new document titled Return Plan like I was planning a corporate acquisition, because that's the language my father understands. And then I wrote the first rule at the top. Do not react. Reposition. Because if my father wanted to destroy me, he'd do it through shame and storytelling, and the only way to beat a storyteller like that is to show up with a narrative so clean and strong that his lies bounce right off it. And then, as if the universe wanted to raise the stakes even higher, I got a new message, this time from my brother Mason, just 3 words that made my stomach drop. Call me. Urgent. I stared at Mason's call me. Urgent. For a full 5 seconds, because when your brother types urgent, your brain doesn't think wedding details, it thinks hospital, accident, disaster, and I hated that my first thought wasn't I miss him, it was my father is moving pieces. I called immediately, and he picked up so fast it was like he'd been holding the phone in his hand waiting for me to blink. His face filled my screen, and I knew something was wrong before he even spoke because his eyes were too bright, and his jaw was doing that tight thing people do when they're trying not to crack. "Hey," I said, and I kept my voice steady because I wasn't about to make him manage my emotions on top of his own. "What happened?" Mason swallowed, glanced off screen like he was alone but still scared someone might hear, and then he said, "Dad called me into his office." That sentence shouldn't be scary, but in my family it was like being summoned to the principal, except the principal controlled the will, the family reputation, the dinner table, and the way everybody talked about you when you weren't in the room. "Okay," I said. And Mason exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. "He asked me if you were coming home." My stomach tightened, not because of the question, but because of what it meant. My father wasn't asking because he missed me. He was asking because he needed to manage me. "What did you say?" I asked. Mason rubbed his forehead. "I told him I didn't know. I told him you've been busy." And then he said something weird. "Tell me exactly," I said, because details matter. When someone like my father speaks, Every word is a lever. Mason hesitated, then repeated it. He said, "She'll come back. She always does what's practical." Hearing that line come out of my brother's mouth felt like a punch, because it meant my father had been rehearsing it, feeding it to people, planting it like a seed so when I returned, my silence would look like agreement. And then, Mason continued, voice dropping, "He told me to invite you to my wedding." I blinked. "Your wedding?" I said, and my voice cracked just a bit, because I wasn't expecting that. Mason's face softened for a second, the stress giving way to something hopeful. "Yeah," he said, and he tried to smile. "I was going to tell you in a better way. I wanted it to be happy. I'm engaged." For a moment, everything else fell away. My brother, my baby brother, getting married, a piece of life moving forward without me. I felt pride and grief at the same time, like two hands squeezing my heart from opposite directions. "Mason," I said, "oh my God, congratulations." He nodded, eyes shining now for a different reason. "Her name's Claire," he said. She's amazing. And I want you there. I need you there." I let myself sit in that for a second, because this is the kind of moment betrayal tries to steal from you, the pure moments. "I want to be there," I said, and I meant it. And then his expression tightened again, like the real reason for the call was dragging him back. "But," he added, "Dad's making it complicated." There it was. The family curse word. Complicated. "How?" I asked, and I already knew it wouldn't be small. Mason inhaled, then said, "He offered to pay for the wedding." My stomach sank because I know that move. My father doesn't give gifts. He buys influence. He buys gratitude. He buys silence. "And that's not all," Mason said quickly, like he wanted to get it out before he lost courage. "He also said he wants Carter and Tessa there, like front and center. He keeps calling them family success stories." I actually felt a cold wave go through me. "Success stories," I repeated, and my mouth tasted like metal. Mason nodded. "And he said if you come, you need to be civil." Civil, the word people use when they're asking the wounded person to protect the wounder's comfort. "What did you say?" I asked. Mason looked down. "I told him it's my wedding and I want my sister there," he said, and then his voice got smaller. "But Sarah," he said, "if there's drama, he'll pull the funding. And Claire's parents, they're already stressed. And I'm stuck in the middle." That hit me. Not because I felt guilty, but because I could see the trap being built in real time. My father wasn't just trying to control me, he was using Mason's happiness as a hostage. And that's when something in me went from anger to clarity, because now it wasn't just about my pride or my pain. It was about stopping my father from turning another family milestone into a stage for his ego. "Listen to me," I said, and my voice turned firm in that older sister way that used to calm him down when he was a kid. "This is your wedding, not his. And I am not going to let him use you." Mason swallowed hard. "What do I do?" he asked, and I could hear how exhausted he was. Because every time I push back, he starts listing what he's done for me. The tuition, the car, the help. And then he makes me feel like I owe him. I close my eyes for 1 second because I know that script too. That's not love. That's accounting. That's a man keeping receipts on his own child so he can collect later. "Mason," I said slowly, "owing someone for kindness is one thing. Being controlled by someone because they helped you is another. If the help comes with threats, it was never help." Mason stared at me like that thought had never been allowed in his head. "He said you left because you were embarrassed," Mason admitted, almost whispering. "He said you ran." My jaw clenched. There it was. The narrative poisoning. Start early, repeat often, make the victim look unstable so nobody listens when she speaks. "And do you believe him?" I asked, and I kept my voice gentle because I needed Mason, not his defenses. Mason shook his head. "No," he said quickly. "I know you. I know you don't run unless something's really wrong." I exhaled, relieved, and then I said the truth that mattered. I didn't leave because I was embarrassed. I left because Dad crossed a line that I still haven't even told you about. Mason's eyes widened. "What line?" he asked, and I could see his brain waking up, all the old suspicions lining up into a shape. And this is where I paused, because telling him the whole truth right then would do two things. It would free me, and it would put a bomb in his lap weeks before his wedding. So I made a decision that felt like swallowing glass. "I'll tell you," I said, "but not over video. Not like this. I want to look you in the eye when I say it." Mason leaned forward. "So you're coming," he said, hope rising. "I'm coming," I confirmed, and my voice didn't shake. "For you, not for Dad." Mason's shoulders dropped like he'd been holding up a weight for months. "Thank you," he said. Then he added, "But Sarah, if Carter and Tessa are there, are you going to do something?" I almost smiled, because that's the question everyone asks when they've been raised in a family that treats confrontation like entertainment, but truth like betrayal. "I'm going to behave," I said. "I'm going to be polite. I'm going to celebrate you. And I'm going to protect myself." Mason's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like a plan," he said. I nodded. "It is." And then Mason said something that turned my blood cold again. "Dad told me he already talked to Carter," Mason said. "He told him to handle you if you show up."
Handle me.
Like I'm a problem employee. Like I'm a leak in the system. "Did Carter say anything?" I asked. Mason hesitated.
He asked about you, he said.
He said he hopes you're doing well. And he said if you come, he wants a private conversation. I felt my stomach twist because of course he did. That man doesn't want accountability in public. He wants control in private. "If he tries to talk to me," I said, "I'm not going alone. I'm not doing private conversations with people who sell others." Mason nodded slowly, like he understood but also didn't want to imagine the ugliness. And then I asked the question that mattered most for Mason's safety. "Do you have the money for the wedding without Dad?" Mason blinked. "Not really," he admitted. "Claire and I have savings, but it would change everything." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a second, because here was the real moral lesson hitting in real time. When a controlling parent pays for something big, they're not helping, they're purchasing a seat at the steering wheel. "Okay," I said, thinking out loud now. "Then we do this smart. We keep the peace on the surface, and we tighten your independence underneath. You and Claire need a backup plan. A budget you can afford without him, even if it means a smaller wedding. Because no party is worth your freedom." Mason's eyes filled a little. "I didn't want it to be like this," he said quietly. "I just wanted my family." That broke my heart more than anything Carter ever did, because Mason was the only one who didn't deserve to be collateral damage. "I know," I said, and my voice softened. "And you're going to have a family. The kind you choose. The kind that doesn't come with price tags." We talked for another 20 minutes about logistics, dates, travel, Claire, how he wanted it to feel, the music, the food, little normal details, and every normal detail felt like oxygen in a room that had been choking for years. When we finally hung up, I sat there in silence, phone in my hand, and I understood the shape of what was coming. My father had escalated from sabotaging my engagement to trying to stage manage my return, and now he was using Mason's wedding as the stage. That meant my next steps couldn't just be emotional, they had to be tactical. So I opened my laptop and started a checklist like I was preparing for an audit. Travel itinerary, safe lodging, car rental in my own name, boundary script, attorney contact, evidence folder on encrypted drive, and one more thing I hadn't admitted to myself until that moment. I needed a buffer, a person who could stand beside me so I wouldn't be cornered, so I wouldn't be isolated, so I wouldn't be forced into the kind of private talk where manipulators rewrite history and call it closure. And right as that thought landed, my calendar reminder popped up for a business dinner I'd forgotten about, a dinner with Daniel Park, the one person in my current life who didn't get intimidated by power games, who actually laughed at them. And when I walked into that restaurant later and saw Daniel stand up with that easy, confident smile like he'd been waiting for me, he took one look at my face and said, "Somebody from your past is trying to drag you back, isn't they?" And the way he said it, calm but sharp, made me realize I wasn't going back alone anymore. Not this time. And then he leaned in and added, "Tell me everything, and then let's decide what kind of entrance you want to make." Daniel didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "That's terrible," the way people do when they don't know what to do with your pain. He said, "Tell me everything, and the way he leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on mine, made me feel like for the first time in years I wasn't carrying this alone. I was finally handing the weight to someone strong enough to hold it without dropping it. So I told him, not in a pretty story, not in a polished way, but in the ugly order it happened. The late-night spreadsheets, the dim laptop screen, my father's name sitting in Carter's inbox like it belonged there, the subject line our arrangement, the 2 transfers like installments on my humiliation, the sentence about my cousin Tessa's trust fund being worth more than I'd make in my lifetime. The way my father described me like a predictable appliance that always returns to the shelf. She always does what's practical. And then I told him about the restaurant, how I cut Carter off before he could perform his breakup speech, how I placed the ring on the table like a dead thing, how I walked out and cried until my face hurt, and then I told him about leaving, the offer overseas, the promotions, the way I built a life that didn't include begging for respect, and then I told him the part that made my voice go colder, that my father hadn't stopped, that he'd been managing Carter and Tessa like puppets, threatening them, controlling their narrative, and now using Mason's wedding like a stage to trap me back into the family photo for validation. Daniel didn't flinch once. He just listened, and when I finished, he exhaled slowly and said, "Your father doesn't love people, he manages them." And I felt that sentence land like a diagnosis, because it explained everything I'd been trying to name for years. Then he asked, "What do you want? Not what should you do? Not what's the right thing, but what do you want?" And that question almost made me laugh because it sounded so simple, and yet I realized I'd been trained my whole life to want what kept everyone else comfortable. I said, "I want Mason to have his wedding without being owned." And Daniel nodded. "And for you," he pressed, because he wasn't letting me disappear inside my brother's needs. I swallowed and said, "I want to walk into that room and not feel small," and then I added the truth that surprised me as I said it. "And I want my father to understand he can't buy my silence anymore." Daniel's mouth tilted like he was entertained, not by the pain, but by the chessboard. "Okay," he said, "then we make an entrance that's calm enough to be undeniable and strong enough to stop them from cornering you." That's when we started building the plan like it was a deal, not drama, because drama is messy and manipulators thrive in mess, but structure scares them. First, boundaries, no private conversations, no getting pulled into a hallway by Carter, no being trapped on a patio by my father with a soft apology and hard manipulation, and if anyone wants to talk, it happens in public or not at all. Second, logistics. We book our own hotel, not staying with family, not giving anyone a spare key to my peace. We rent our own car, we keep our schedules tight, and we arrive with enough time to breathe, but not enough time to be ambushed. Third, story control. I don't overshare, I don't explain, I let my presence speak, because the biggest flex in a family like mine isn't yelling, it's showing up stable. Daniel asked if I wanted him to play boyfriend or just friend, and I looked at him and said, "I want you to be exactly what you are, because pretending is what my family does, and I'm done performing for them." He smiled and said, "Perfect. I'm naturally irritating to men who think they own the room," and I actually laughed, like a real laugh. And it shocked me because I hadn't realized how much I missed laughing without it being followed by fear. Over the next 2 weeks, we practiced like it was ridiculous and deadly serious at the same time. Daniel would play my father in a mock conversation, deepening his voice, doing this fake concerned tone. "Sarah, why so distant? We're family." And I'd respond the way I needed to respond in real life, calm, short, no fuel. "I'm here for Mason." And then he'd try to bait me. "You've changed." And I'd reply, "Yes." Because there's no insult in growth unless you accept it as one. I also wrote down phrases like scripts because when you're triggered, your brain goes blank, so you need something to grab. I wrote, "That's not up for discussion. I'm not having this conversation. Excuse me, I need to check on Mason," and my personal favorite, "No thank you," because nothing infuriates controlling people like polite refusal. The night before our flight, Daniel poured 2 glasses of wine and said, "One more thing." And I braced myself, and then he said, "If this gets ugly, we leave." Immediately, no hero moments. And I felt my chest loosen because that's what safety actually is. Not a promise that nobody will hurt you, but a plan that prevents them from trapping you in it. We landed back in the States, and it was surreal how familiar everything felt, and yet how foreign it looked through my new eyes. Like my body remembered the streets, but my soul didn't live there anymore. At the airport, Mason hugged me so hard I nearly dropped my bag, and he pulled back, stared at my face like he was trying to check if I was okay, and then he looked at Daniel and did that protective brother thing, the handshake that's half greeting, half evaluation, and Daniel met it with an easy confidence that wasn't arrogant, just solid. Mason smiled and said, "Thank you for coming with her." And Daniel replied, "I'm honored." And something about hearing someone say honored instead of obligated made my throat tighten, because that's the difference between chosen love and family duty. The drive to the hotel was quiet for a moment, and then Mason started talking fast, nerves spilling out, the venue schedule, Claire's parents, the seating chart drama, the way my father kept offering suggestions, which in my family is code for orders, and I listened while watching the road and noticing how my hands weren't shaking, not even a little. Because this time I wasn't coming back as the girl waiting to be accepted. I was coming back as the woman who already knows her value. At the hotel, Daniel and I dropped our bags and he said, "Before we go to the rehearsal dinner, we set one rule." And I knew what it was before he said it. He looked me in the eye and said, "If you feel your chest tighten, you squeeze my hand twice and we move." And that tiny signal felt like an escape hatch built into my body. Now, I need to say something right here, because a lot of you watching love these stories. You binge them, you comment, you send them to friends, and we see the stats. Most people watching are not subscribed. So if you've been riding this emotional roller coaster with us and you want to be part of our community, go ahead and hit subscribe right now. Thank you. It helps keep these stories alive, and it tells YouTube you want more of this kind of real-life betrayal and comeback content. Then came the rehearsal dinner, and I'm telling you, the moment we walked in, the room shifted, like the air changed pressure, because families like mine can sense when the scapegoat returns with backbone. My mother spotted me first, gasped like she'd been holding her breath for years, and came at me with both arms, squeezing me so tight her perfume got on my collar, and she kept whispering, "You're here. You're really here." And I hugged her back and felt that complicated ache, because I love my mom, but she's married to a man who treats love like leverage, and sometimes that makes her an accomplice even when she doesn't mean to be. Then I saw my father across the room, standing tall like he owned the restaurant, laughing with Claire's dad, playing charming patriarch, and when his eyes landed on me, the smile didn't disappear, it just froze for half a second, like a mask slipping and being caught on camera. He walked over slowly, measured, and I watched him do the same assessment he always does. What am I wearing? Who am I with? How much control do I have? But Daniel stood beside me like a wall that smiled, and my father's gaze flicked to him and back to me with immediate calculation. "Sarah," my father said, voice warm, like we were a normal family with normal problems, "it's good to see you." And I said, "Hello, Dad." Simple, no emotion, no apology for distance. And then my father turned to Daniel and offered his hand like he was welcoming a business partner. Daniel shook it once, firm but not aggressive, and said, "I've heard a lot about you." And the way he said it was so polite it was almost dangerous, because it could mean anything. My father smiled wider, the smile of a man who thinks charm is a weapon. "All good things, I hope," he said, and Daniel replied, "Interesting things." And I felt a tiny spark of joy because Daniel just stepped onto the board and refused to be moved. Then the room opened up and there they were, Carter and Tessa, together, dressed like a magazine couple, Tessa's hair perfect, her smile bright but strained, Carter's posture stiff like a man wearing a suit made of guilt, and for a split second, time did that weird slow thing, because I could see the whole past and present stacked on top of each other, the beach proposal, the email, the cash transfer, the staged engagement, and now this performance dinner, where they were supposed to look like the happy ending. Tessa's eyes locked on mine, and she did that fake surprise. "Sarah, oh my God," like she hadn't rehearsed it, like she hadn't known this moment was coming, and she started walking toward me with open arms like we were going to hug and erase history with body language. I didn't move. I just stood there, calm, and when she got close enough, I stepped half an inch back, not dramatic, just enough to make it clear, access revoked. Tessa's arms faltered midair and she laughed too loudly. "Wow, look at you." And I said, "Hello, Tessa." And then I turned my head slightly and looked at Carter. He swallowed, eyes flicking down and up like he couldn't decide whether to act confident or ashamed, and he said, "Sarah," in that soft tone like he wanted to manage the moment, and Daniel, without even looking at him, placed a hand gently on the small of my back, steady, quiet, and I realized something terrifying and satisfying at the same time. Carter wasn't scared of me. He was scared of what I might reveal. And my father was watching all of it, reading the body language like a stock chart, trying to predict if the market was about to crash. We sat down for dinner, and the conversation started with safe topics: travel, work, how long it's been, and every sentence felt like a layer of sugar spread over rot. But I played it perfectly. I smiled when appropriate. I asked Claire's mother about the flowers. I praised Mason. I gave my father nothing to accuse me of later, and then, halfway through the meal, Carter leaned toward me like he couldn't help himself and said under his breath, "Can we talk privately later?" And my heart didn't race, my throat didn't tighten. I just looked at him like he'd asked something absurd, and I said, loud enough for Daniel and Mason to hear, "No." And then I added, "If there's something you need to say, you can say it here." And Carter's face went pale because he wasn't prepared to be denied so cleanly, and Tessa's fork paused midair, and my father's eyes narrowed just slightly because he could feel it, the control slipping, the script breaking, and then my mother, trying to smooth it over, started talking louder about dessert, and everyone pretended nothing happened. But under the table, Daniel squeezed my hand once like a promise, and I realized the night wasn't even close to its main event yet, because as we stood up to leave, my father stepped into my path with that calm smile and said, "Sarah, I'd like a moment with you." And I watched the room subtly lean in, because in families like mine, conflict is entertainment as long as it's not theirs. And I looked at my father and said, "Not tonight." And for the first time, his smile actually faltered, because he wasn't used to hearing no from me, not the old me. And then he whispered, just for me, "You can make this easy." And I whispered back, "So can you." And I walked out with Daniel and Mason watching behind us, and the second the cold air hit my face outside, my phone buzzed with a new notification from an email address I didn't recognize, and the subject line was 7 words that made my stomach drop in a completely different way. "I have proof your mother knew too." I didn't open that email right away because my hands were suddenly too warm and too cold at the same time, like my body knew before my brain did that this wasn't just another ugly layer. This was the kind of detail that changes how you remember your entire childhood. Because if my mother knew, then all those hugs and "it'll work out" speeches weren't comfort, they were damage control, and that is a different kind of betrayal. The soft kind, the kind that smiles at you while it holds the door open for your heartbreak to walk through. Back at the hotel, Daniel watched me pace like I was trying to outwalk the truth, and he didn't interrupt. He just sat on the edge of the bed, calm, present, letting me run out of avoidance. I finally opened my laptop, clicked the email, and there it was, a forwarded chain from years ago, subject lines that looked painfully normal, family logistics, dinner plans, and then a message from my father to my mother that made my stomach drop. I handled Carter. "It's done. She'll be upset, but she'll be practical. Don't tell her. It'll only cause drama. We're doing what's best." And underneath it, my mother's reply, short, terrified, and unmistakably complicit. "Are you sure this is necessary? She loves him." And my father's response, "Love doesn't pay bills. She'll thank us later." My eyes went blurry, not from tears yet, but from the way your brain refuses to accept what it's seeing, like maybe if you stare long enough the words will rearrange into something less cruel. Daniel leaned closer and read it once, then looked at me and said, very quietly, "That's a confirmation, not a suspicion." And I nodded, because now it wasn't a feeling, it was a fact with timestamps. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my laptop. I didn't do any of the things people think they want until the moment comes, and you realize rage won't give you your mother back. I sat down slowly, like my joints had turned heavy, and I felt this strange emptiness, like someone had removed a piece of my foundation without warning. Daniel reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away, but I also didn't squeeze back because my mind was doing math again, not money math, survival math. If I confront my mother tonight, I ruin Mason's wedding, and my father wins because he gets to say I'm dramatic and unstable if I confront her after the wedding. I protect Mason, but I have to sit through 2 more days pretending I'm okay, while my mother smiles in my face, and my father watches me like a project. Daniel said, "What's your move?" And I stared at the wall and said, "I don't burn Mason's day. because that was the one pure thing left in this mess, and I refused to let my father poison it the way he poisoned everything else. The next morning, the wedding day, I woke up earlier than my alarm and just lay there listening to the hotel sounds, distant hallway footsteps, elevator dings, muffled voices, and it hit me how absurd life is, how the world keeps doing normal things while your personal universe is collapsing. I showered longer than usual, letting the hot water hit my shoulders like it could rinse off betrayal, and I dressed carefully, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself I'm not the girl they bargained over. I'm the woman who walked away and built a life big enough to stand in. Daniel wore a simple suit, nothing flashy, but he looked like the kind of man who can't be intimidated by family politics, which is exactly why I brought him. At the venue, Mason was nervous in the sweetest way, adjusting his tie, cracking jokes, trying to act like his heart wasn't pounding out of his chest, and when he saw me, he smiled like a kid again and said, "You're really here," and I hugged him and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere today," and I meant it. Claire looked radiant, the kind of bride who glows because she's marrying the right person, and she hugged me like she already decided I belonged in her family, which nearly made me cry because it was kindness without conditions, something my own family had apparently forgotten how to do. The ceremony started, and for a little while, I let myself get pulled into it. The music, the vows, Mason's voice cracking when he said, "I choose you." The way Claire looked at him like she'd been waiting her whole life for a safe place to land, and I felt proud and sad and grateful all at once. Then came the reception, and that's where my family always reveals itself, because put them near an open bar and a microphone, and suddenly everyone's mask slips a little. My father worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, charming Claire's relatives, telling stories, laughing too loud, and every time his eyes flicked toward me, I could feel him measuring whether I was going to behave like practical Sarah. My mother hovered, touching my arm, asking if I was eating enough, calling me sweetheart like nothing had happened, and I watched her with a kind of numb curiosity, like she was a character I used to know. Carter and Tessa posed for pictures. Tessa's smile trained and bright, Carter's smile strained and thin, and I noticed little details I never would have noticed back when I was begging to be chosen. Tessa's hand gripping his forearm a little too hard, Carter's eyes darting every time my father spoke, like a man waiting to be corrected. At one point, Carter tried again. He approached me near the drink table and said, "Can we just talk for 2 minutes?" And I didn't even look surprised. I just looked at him like he was asking me to help him move a couch after breaking into my house. "No," I said, calm, and he hissed, "You don't have to do this." And I finally met his eyes and said, "I don't have to do anything you want ever again," and I walked away before he could respond. That small moment felt like a payoff for every night I'd cried alone, because the truth is, the opposite of being controlled isn't screaming, it's refusing access. Later, Mason pulled me aside and asked, "Are you okay?" And I wanted to tell him everything right then, but I looked at his face, at the joy and nerves and love all mixed together, and I said, "I'm okay and I'm proud of you." And I meant it, and then I added, "After today, you and I talk, just you and me." And he nodded like he understood the weight behind that. Then came the speeches, and my father predictably tried to position himself as the hero. He stood up, glass raised, and started talking about family and loyalty and how proud he is of his children. And I felt my jaw tighten because the hypocrisy was almost artistic, the way a man can sabotage his daughter's life and then toast to love like he's a patron saint of marriage. People clapped. People smiled. My mother dabbed her eyes. And I realized something that might sound harsh, but it's true. Most people will applaud whatever story is being told if it sounds nice enough, because challenging it costs social energy. That's why manipulators love public moments. They hide in politeness. They hide in tradition. They hide behind "don't ruin the day." And I decided I wasn't going to ruin Mason's day, but I was also not going to leave that room without reclaiming myself in a way my father couldn't rewrite. The moment came unexpectedly, like life handing me a cue. The DJ called for a little game, the bouquet toss, and Claire, smiling mischievously, looked straight at me like she decided something. A group of women gathered, Tessa included, and I could feel Tessa's performance energy, the way she leaned forward like the world owed her a cute moment on camera. Claire turned, counted down, and threw the bouquet, and it came straight toward me, and I caught it on instinct, not because I believe in that superstition, but because my hands have always been good at catching what other people drop. The room erupted in cheers, people laughing, someone shouting next, and Tessa's face flickered for half a second, just half, with something sharp and ugly before she pasted her smile back on. Daniel stepped beside me, took my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I heard a few surprised murmurs because nobody expected me to return with a calm, successful life and a man who looked like he belonged there more than Carter did. My father appeared almost immediately, like the bouquet had summoned him, and he leaned in and said softly, "We should talk," and I looked at him and said, "You don't get private conversations with me anymore," and his eyes narrowed, the charm fading. My mother came up too, smiling nervously, and whispered, "Honey, can we just not do this today?" And that's when something in me finally snapped into clarity, not rage, clarity, and I said, quietly but firmly, "You already did it, Mom. You did it years ago." And her face went pale like she understood exactly what I meant. My father's voice dropped, controlled, dangerous. "Not here," he said, and I turned to face both of them, right there in the middle of the reception noise, and I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just spoke with the kind of calm that makes liars uncomfortable. "I saw the emails," I said. "I saw the money. And I saw Mom's reply too." My mother's lips parted like she wanted to deny it, but no sound came out, because denial doesn't work when the person holding the proof isn't begging to be believed. My father's face tightened, and he tried the classic move, the moral rewrite. I did what I thought was best, and I nodded once like I was acknowledging a toddler's excuse. "That's the problem," I said. "You thought you were allowed to decide my life." He hissed, "We can fix this," and I shook my head, not angry, just finished. "No," I said. "You can't buy back trust. You can't negotiate respect. And you don't get to pretend you were protecting me when you were protecting your image." My mother whispered. I was scared, and I looked at her, really looked, and felt the grief hit like a wave because in that moment she wasn't my protector. She was another person my father trained to comply. "I believe you," I said, and my voice softened just enough to make it real. "But you still chose him over me. And that choice had consequences." My father tried to step closer, and Daniel stepped slightly in front of me without making it dramatic, just a quiet barrier, and my father noticed and hated it, and for the first time I saw him small, not powerless, but small, like a man realizing the lever he used on his daughter no longer reaches. I leaned in slightly, kept my voice low so only they could hear, and delivered the line that mattered most for my own soul. "I'm here for Mason. After today, you get distance, not access." My father's jaw clenched, my mother's eyes filled, and behind us the reception kept going, music, laughter, plates clinking, because the world doesn't stop for your reckoning, and maybe that's the point. You don't need the world to pause. You just need to stop pausing your life for people who hurt you. I walked away, found Mason, hugged him, told him I loved him, and then later, when the night wound down, Daniel and I left without sneaking, without apologizing, without asking permission, and in the car he asked, "How do you feel?" And I surprised myself by smiling. "Lighter," I said, because the truth is, closure doesn't come from them admitting it. Closure comes from you naming it and then refusing to carry it quietly. And if you're watching this thinking, family should always come first, I want you to sit with one moral lesson that took me years to learn. Loyalty is not a blank check, and love is not supposed to feel like a hostage situation. If your family only values you when you're compliant, that isn't love. That's control wearing a Sunday outfit. Before I end, I need you to do something for me. In the comments, tell me straight, did my parents cross the unforgivable line? And what would you have done in my shoes? Expose it publicly or handle it quietly like I did? Because I promise you, your answers help other viewers who are silently living through their own version of this. And if you want the next story to binge, the one that'll make you question everything you thought you owed family, click the next video on your screen because the next one goes even deeper into how money and favoritism turn relatives into enemies, and I'll show you exactly how to spot the manipulation before it costs you years of your life.